What's at the heart of Toronto's political drama? There are murmurings that the city is in the middle of a class war between the downtowners and the suburbanites. Joining us now for their perspectives, Laurie Goldstein, columnist at the Toronto Sun; John Moore, host of Moore in the Morning on News Talk 1010 Radio; Edward Keenan, senior editor at The Grid; and Eric Andrew G., contributor at Maisonneuve Quarterly. And we welcome all of you guys here to TVO. First time for you, which shocks me.
Thank you.
Because you've been an institution on morning radio in this town for how long?
It's nice of you to say so.
Okay, well, I even mean it. I even mean it. And you were here before when you were a little kid.
That's right.
I remember that.
What kids think about Iraq?
That's right, ages ago. And you haven't been here before, which is just shocking.
I've been at TV. Oh, we did.
You have.
Oh, yeah, but it's been a while.
It's been a long time, and you and I were City Hall reporters 30 years ago,
yeah, I know,
covering Mayor Eggleton when there were no rumors of videos with anybody doing anything bad.
And then my career went to hell. And
No. Eric, I'm actually going to quote you first, okay? Here's what you did in Maisonneuve just a few days ago, and I'm going to read this and then we're going to chat. For many downtowners, streaming Doug Ford's Global News interview on their laptops, the thin gold chain around the city councillor's neck was as important and as damning as the allegations that he sold hash in high school. I think I speak for most of Toronto's left-wing social elite when I say that selling hash to kids in the suburbs is a pretty benign thing to do. No worse, in fact, probably a good deal less harmful than selling alcohol to the public at large, as the government of Ontario does. It isn't Doug Ford's drug vending that has the city gasping and reaching for the smelling salts. The thing that really shocks the haute bourgeoisie of downtown Toronto is how tacky the Fords seem. I mean, gold chains? Okay, that's well written, I must say. Is he onto something here with that?
Yes and no, because a lot of my colleagues at the National Post will say the same things. As a matter of fact, they have this sort of composite of a person who, and apparently I answer the description. I'm a bicycle riding, Chardonnay sipping, downtown living, liberal elitist, apparently. Yes. But I call this actually the snobbery of anti-snobbery, because in all of that, and they do this in the federal level as well, is the presumption that if you drink Tim Hortons, you're better than the person who drinks Starbucks. That if you drink beer, it's better than Chardonnay. If you like hockey, it's better than opera. So if snobbery is automatically thinking by the virtue of your tropes you are better than other people, then we're at a stalemate and both groups think they're better.
Laurie, is he onto something here?
Well, yeah, I think so, except that when you say something that, I don't mean simplistically, but when you make it that simple, it doesn't deal with things like, I guess I'm as conservative as you can be. If the mayor of Toronto, in fact, smoked crack, a law and order mayor, smoked crack in office 6 months ago, I'm as angry about that as anybody. I don't know if it happened. I have my own opinion. I think there's certainly reason to believe it might have happened. So it was like Obama said in that speech that sort of launched his career. He said, we got people in the blue states. Remember, he talked about, and I think one of the problems is, like, it's the way we do mapping. When I was preparing for this show, I went to the map of the 2010 election, and you see all the blue ones were Ford, and in the center was the city ones, except for a few up north. But I think what we forget is that in those Ford places, there were lots of Smitherman supporters. And in those Smitherman places, there were lots of Ford supporters. And a successful politician has to be able to build alliances wherever those people are.
It feels, though, Edward, as if we're in the middle of something akin to, and this is the reference I think Eric means to the gold chain, how can these Beverly Hillbillies be running City Hall? I mean, are you picking that up?
Well, yeah, partly. And I mean, after Eric wrote his piece, I did make a derisive mention of the gold chain in a piece I wrote, right? Because I did see the reaction on Twitter of people saying, like, he's got his hair slicked back and he's wearing a gold chain and he's denying drug use. Didn't he see Scarface? But I mean, I think there's something to it. I think it's easy enough to overstate it, and I think it's easy enough to get backwards. But there are signifiers like you know, the mayor drives a Cadillac Escalade SUV, and for some people that's a status symbol. But for other people, and many wealthy people, it's a gauche vehicle to drive. It's you know, you'd want an Audi or something a little less conspicuous. And those things exist, but I think actually that John was onto something that Rob Ford gets, and his brother Doug get a lot more support stemming from their perceived gaucheness than they do get derision, right? Like, there is a bit of sneering at them, but they become champions. They're considered avatars of the working class because they don't know which fork to use.
How do you self-identify?
Politically?
Well, I don't mean that. I mean, would you call yourself part of the left-wing social elite, haute bourgeoisie of this city?
I'd say my background is upper middle class, and I live downtown.
You like white wine?
I prefer red wine.
Ooh, throwing us a curveball there, are you?
No, but yeah, I think I think I probably fit that description pretty well.
You like all these labels that we're throwing around here?
You know, I think they're restrictive, and it cuts both ways. I think it can be a problem to reduce someone, you know, to a stereotype, whichever stereotype that is, and you know, both sides do it. I actually agree with Edward to an extent that their perceived tackiness, if you will, the Fords that is, has helped them politically in some quarters, certainly. You know, there's been a lot of talk that people support the Fords despite their character issues because they're so aligned with them ideologically. I actually think that's wrong. I think people support them because of their kind of you know, truculence with the media occasionally and their sort of bull in a china shop routine.
Yeah, I think let's remember though that, you know, our shorthand at the Toronto Sun is always, why did Rob Ford win the election? It's because Kyle Ray paid for a $12,000 retirement party out of public funds, and it was perfectly legal.
Just remind everybody who lives outside Toronto, this was a downtown city councillor,
I think
left-leaning.
most people would know. I think most people would know that and there was, and people felt, because I don't think it's about class, I think it's about values and the values you project. And whatever you think of Rob Ford, I think a lot of people at all economic levels, looking at City Hall and politicians and everything from Mike Duffy to the sponsorship scandal to the feds and their ridiculous military purchases and to a lot of the stuff that went on in Toronto where councillors didn't use their public dollars appropriately, they were angry. And he became the voice of that anger.
They know Rob Ford is watching the nickels and dimes, don't they?
That's right. And remember that.
Well, they believe he's watching the nickels and dimes.
Yeah, but remember things like, what was he attacked for by these, we'll call them elites on council? He paid his own money for his office expenses. And they said, oh, you can't do that, and we have to have an investigation.
Yeah, that's, that's not the only thing they attacked him on.
Yada. Well, no, well, okay.
Voting no on everything on council.
But the point is that how do you think that plays out in the hinterland?
Well,
that's our guy.
But he's been a genius and Rob Ford is not very often called a genius. So he's been a genius at exactly convincing people that what he's doing is watching the nickels and dimes, convincing people that somehow his conflict of interest, his vote to excuse himself from a penalty was about donations to a charity, right, rather than some ethical issue. And that, again, him spending his own money to promote his own political causes outside any outside supervision, that people complaining about that and wondering where that money came from is actually a matter of spendthrift.
But there's a difference between being attuned to the conflict of interest laws as they exist today and showing up with a, what is it, $250 million surplus in the budget, which is what I think we've discovered.
Yeah, but I mean, we've had that surplus, though, stretching well back into the Miller years, right?
And this is something, well, this is something the Ford brothers do constantly, is they exaggerate their accomplishments. And he'll always come back to this phrase, they said it couldn't be done. Nobody said garbage couldn't be privatized. Half of city services were privatized the day he was elected, and he privatized a small section that was, you know, adjacent to another section. They'll talk about this $1 billion they've saved. Nobody can find $1 billion in savings.
The city budget is bigger today than it was when Rob Ford took office, and that's a fact.
But in fairness to Rob Ford, when he ran, from before he ran, the attack on him from certain media and others was the city is going to fall apart. There'll be labor strikes. He'll gut the unions. None of that has happened.
But almost nothing has happened.
Wait a minute. He got a 4-year labor contract without a garbage strike that made significant inroads in some of the provisions on job protection that the city couldn't sustain.
But this is the point.
Miller couldn't do that. Lastman couldn't do that.
This is actually where his reputation
privatized half of the garbage.
And
saved us money.
No, he didn't privatize it. He contracted it.
And Olivia Chow's mom is getting her garbage.
He didn't. He did not privatize the garbage collection. He contracted out half of the city's worth. And actually, that labor strike is one place where his reputation as a maniac, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode, helped him because the unions were cowed, right? And they accepted.
Okay, but this is the point, John. The issue that I'm picking up is less, it's about the Ford agenda, and more about the Fords, the wearing the gold chain, the sense that these guys are somehow out of the mainstream?
No, I think it's more because people look at Rob Ford. I mean, it presupposes, just saying it's all because of his tackiness. I mean, Ralph Klein was a fairly a working class man, but he got the job done. Lyndon Johnson used to go to the bathroom with the door open in the Oval Office in order to humiliate people and get what he wanted out of them. So gaucheness works if you're getting something done, if you have an agenda. I've always said Rob Ford is a great idea, but his accomplishments now in 2.5 years amount to the first 8 months getting a few things done. He's routinely absent at City Hall. It's nothing to do with class. It's the fact that a lot of people believe in this city and feel that it's completely adrift.
Yeah, I think that goes too far. I mean, actually, you know, I'm not trying to say that all Rob Ford critics are snobs or that there are no substantive issues to criticize him on. You know, far from it. But sometimes the tone of the criticism of the Fords, you know, goes beyond the pale of what other politicians are subjected to.
Like what?
Well, I'll give you an example. There's an image uploaded on the Toronto Life website recently. There's a picture of the SCTV character, the Mackenzie brothers, the original hosers, right? Mm-hmm. And there were someone had photoshopped Rob and Doug Ford's faces onto their bodies. And in case anyone was going to mistake it for a loving homage to the Fords, they had also superimposed what was supposed to be a crack pipe onto one of the Molson bottles on the table. So, you know, the joke is with this picture that the Fords are hosers. You know, there are lots of substantive issues to criticize them on. They take, you know, strong and right-wing positions on lots of divisive policy issues, so they're going to have critics. But it's impossible to imagine someone making that same joke with Stephen Harper or Jim Flaherty.
But like, let's actually unpack that a bit, because if you remember, like, Brian Mulrooney was mocked for his Gucci's and whatever. It's the caricature is actually, it's a caricature, but it fits with the Ford brothers, and that's why they're subjected to that caricature, right? Almost every politician who finds himself unpopular gets mocked, and they get mocked for exaggerations of things that are actually true about them. And the thing is that it is true that the Ford brothers are kind of hosers, and I think they're kind of proud of that. And they've played up that image.
But the question is, I think, though, I mean, you could make a caricature of, say, Stephen Harper's secretiveness, but because that actually bears on his governance. But you know, making a caricature of the Ford's class status is irrelevant to how they run the city. So I think it's different.
If you say that, you haven't been paying attention to how they run the city, because actually Rob Ford, as a walking mess, a hot mess, he can't control his temper, he can't make friends, he can't be diplomatic. That's how his whole governing agenda fell apart, right?
Well,
Inside City Hall, he's been a glory.
I wouldn't feel bad for Rob Ford or Doug Ford. I think they love it. I think this is their element. When they are fighting everybody, that's how Ford was with the council. And I think the tragedy of Rob Ford, I think there's goodness in there. I think one of the things that got him elected, he actually answered his calls. We make a joke of it now, but he did. And if you couldn't get your counselor, you could call him and he would do something. And that spread by word of mouth, and people believed in that. And that was good. The tragedy for me is that he hasn't grown into the role of mayor, where it's not always a fight. You have to have allies. You have to make allegiances.
He still answers calls too, Laurie.
Yeah, but we're agreeing. But like, I listen to Doug Ford when he's on News Talk 1010, and it's this whining and we're such great guys and yet, yeah, and you call every second person on council a liar. So deal with it. You're in a war, go to war.
His former press secretary says that there are people in Ford's office, maybe including both Ford brothers, who don't understand that there's a difference between campaigning and governing. And yeah, I think...
Oh, no, Ford's never stopped campaigning.
I don't buy the idea that he's a happy man. I actually, I look on Rob Ford
and I say he's happy. I say he's happy when he's fighting.
No, he's probably, you know what, I think he is happy when he's campaigning. And in campaign mode, he's ready to do battle. But I've often seen him as kind of a sad figure. I don't know that Rob Ford wanted to be mayor. I think his family is under the impression that they are a major political dynasty, when in fact the father was, you know, a backbencher for 4 years. Rob Ford was a very good retail city councillor, although as Marcus G. calls him now, he's the highest ranking receptionist in Toronto. I think that
But he was mocked when he was a councillor,
yeah,
too.
but he's like Chauncey Gardner. I mean, he spends his days wandering around, meeting people about, you know, displaced sewer grates and touring public housing. And you don't have to be Jane Jacobs, Louis Mumford genius to run a city, but it would help if you rolled up your sleeves and said, here's where we're going.
I just want to touch on this point that Edward made, tying the fact that he's a hoser to his belligerence. You know, I think you tried to make that point sort of symbolically in a column when you described one of Doug Ford's sort of aggressive media interviews responding to the allegations that he sold hash. And you said that he stared into the camera like a pro wrestler with his hair gelled back and a gold chain around his neck. And the implication was that those signifiers, those fashion choices, meant that he was a menacing figure. I mean, they were meant to convey menace. And I'm not sure if that's quite fair. I mean,
Can we just check that? Is that what you meant to convey?
I don't know if I thought that he meant to convey menace, but when he stared into the camera and said to the publisher of the Globe and Mail, or the editor-in-chief of the Globe and Mail, how would you like it if I came out and made your kids cry? Right. I think he was intending to convey menace, and I think he was successfully doing that.
I don't disagree with that, but I think the fact that he was wearing a gold chain and had gel in his hair
well, that was a sly
not
reference to your column, which was published the day before, right?
In terms of mayors wearing gold chains,
that's what they're supposed to do, aren't they?
Almost do that. Almost do that.
I mean, the thing is, Mel Lashman was like wore a hairpiece and a pinky ring and all that.
Let me go here next. John, let me pick up on this. Do you think that since and I'm going to call them the Fords because they are a team, do you think since they got elected in 2010, the stereotypes we have about the people who live in the inner suburbs and the stereotypes we have about the people who live midtown and downtown have gotten worse?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree entirely with you. It's about signifiers and coding, and it's about trying to demonize your opponent. So, as I said off the top, I resent being characterized negatively by suburbanites as much, I'm sure, as they resent. It's something I refuse to do on my show. Something I refuse to do on my show is, and I never allow people to refer to the mayor's weight. It's incidental. But yes, the divide is much bigger, and I think it's about this city's unique composition and the fact that amalgamation was and is a disaster.
So we're more divided today as a result of the Fords having been elected. Fair to say?
I think we're more divided because I agree with John. Amalgamation never really took, and now you have this huge 45-member council with the worst of both worlds. Huge council, weak mayor system. And so the mayor does become only one person, and eventually that wears everybody down. It wore down David Miller, and it wore down Mel Lashman. And in terms of making international headlines, I mean, the line I've used in the last few weeks is, gee, all this makes me long for the quiet dignity of the Mel Lashman. So we've had that before, and it's not the end of the world. And Jon Stewart mocks politicians every day. That's what he does. He's good at it. And the city will go on. And I think Rob Ford, if he runs, depending on the field, will probably lose. Is he dead? No. You saw that poll. 50% of the public believe him versus the star. You do this table, or media, or downtown elites, 95% of us, 95% of us, including the conservative, believe the Toronto Star. Mm-hmm. How did we get so far away from our audiences who are going, not only would half of us vote for him, a third of us, not only would half of us believe him, a third would still vote for him. That means, depending on who runs, he can win.
The thing is that actually 50% of the voters believe you smoke crack is not usually a good number for a politician, but maybe that's how we've lowered the bar for Rob Ford.
It's all about where your growth is. If you're 34% of people say they'll vote for you, and 16% more are willing to give you the benefit of the doubt, you start getting to 40%.
No,
you win.
That same poll says that 34. His universe is only 4 points bigger than his support numbers. Right? He's got 35% say they're going to vote for him, and only another 4% say they're undecided. There's 60% of people who say they will never vote for him.
Polls have been so accurate lately.
Yeah,
well, that's true.
Well, you can't have it both ways.
However, if 3 or 4 or 5 other people get into the race and all split the anti-Ford vote, 37% could be enough to win.
But it's possible. Elitists will never allow that to happen.
Well,
and they've been so successful over the years.
It happened last time.
But I did want to get back to the point about what this says about the way that the city's divided, and it's interesting because we are such a vibrant example of the city's diversity here. But when we talk about the caricatures of
from the middle-aged, the young middle-aged white guy.
No, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Is that
we didn't pick the panel?
Is that is that actually the caricatures can get out of hand, and actually the inner suburban areas that are thought of as Ford Nation actually contain a huge majority. A majority visible minority population, whereas the downtown is 70% white. They are less affluent, significantly less affluent, and most of the most troubled neighborhoods in the city are in the inner suburbs where Ford was popular. And I think when we start talking about things like de-amalgamation, it's important to recognize that if you're in downtown Toronto and you want to politically separate yourself from the suburbs, what you're saying is that you want the poorest people in the city to sort of be separated from you. It's a kind of white flight almost.
Eric?
I think Edward had a really good column about de-amalgamation. I think he's also right that the division between suburbs and downtown is often more rhetorical than it is based on real policy disagreements. I mean, I was at this Etobicoke Community Council meeting a couple weeks ago, the one that Rob Ford showed up at and started slapping fridge magnets on all the cars. It was about this proposed shopping and housing development in Humber Valley Village out in Etobicoke. And the residents of the area got up one after another, and they all said, we don't want to become like Liberty Village. That was the boogeyman. They said it over and over.
Just explain the reference. What does that mean?
Liberty Village is a condo development around King and Dufferin, downtown.
Near the X.
That's right, near the X.
And where the hipsters lived. Yeah.
That's right, exactly. And this is how they portrayed it, like it was some sort of yuppie Sodom and Gomorrah, like there was all high-density housing where no one knew each other, and it was just a nightmare. I mean, what they left out was that at the time Liberty Village was built and the condos in Queen West and environs, there was a lot of local opposition too. In fact, people made a lot of the same arguments that these people in Humber Valley Village were making against their condo. You know, right? Yeah.
John, last word to you on this. Are we in the middle of a class war in this city right now?
More in the media than in real life. I think most people are preoccupied with their day-to-day lives. But when it comes to, for example, transportation, one of the most divisive issues, and Rob Ford always says, well, it's about the war on the car. That is a significant divide because people want to live in the suburbs for all of the benefits of living in the suburbs, but they expect the downtown to be orchestrated in order to allow more cars than the downtown can allow.
The Ford subway plan didn't make any sense economically. I mean,
Right.
the last election I went through all of them, none of them made any sense economically. The only one that made any sense was Joe Pantalone because it was Transit City. All the others were just made up stuff, and it's always been that way. We always talk about building subways. Nobody mentions it's about 300 million a kilometer, and everybody fights everybody else, and nothing gets done. And that
so
was before Rob Ford.
The plan we have now again is Transit City. So because we have a weak mayor system that overruled Rob Ford, and then that's where we're back to.
Well, one big
Well,
word.
no, Kathleen Wynne wants to have a whole, we're going to have subways to heaven if they can get anybody to pay for them.
That's another show, Lori. One word that came out over and over again in this discussion was de-amalgamation. And we're going to talk about that with a couple of city councillors coming up. So let me thank you, first of all, Lori Goldstein from the Toronto Sun, John Moore, News Talk 1010, Edward Keenan from The Grid, Eric Andrew G., who we read in Maisonneuve. Thanks, guys.
Pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Can Toronto turn back the clock on amalgamation? 2 city councillors on that right after this. The old city of Toronto used to be smaller, but that all changed in 1998 when the 6 municipalities that comprised metropolitan Toronto became one big new city. Is the creation of the megacity the seed of many of the current political and class divides? Here with their thoughts, 2 Toronto City Councillors. Shelley Carroll, who's the councillor for Ward 33, Don Valley East, and Karen Stentz, councillor for Ward 16, Eglinton Lawrence. It's good to have you 2 councillors back here at TVO. Yeah. I say back here to you, but first time for you, I think. Isn't that right?
As a politician, yes.
As a politician, yes,
that
is right.
I was here as an activist years ago.
That is true. Okay. Well, every time we hear about these debates about the inner suburbs versus the inner city, usually what follows is a cry for de-amalgamation because a lot of people are still unhappy about the way the inner suburbs and the city was forced together in the first place, whatever it was, 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. Karen Stintz, do you hear that?
I mean, I don't, Steve, and I actually have an interesting ward in that I'm right in the center of the city, so half my ward is former Toronto and half my ward is former North York. And, but, you know, I don't have the same nostalgia. I grew up in North York, I lived in Cabbagetown, now I live in North Toronto, and I've always considered myself to be a Torontonian. And so for different people, that former suburb means different things. And while I think we have strong neighborhoods that are unique, I'm not of the belief that there is this big urge to de-amalgamate.
How about you, Shelley Carroll?
Well, there's an economy of scale, and that was the reason for the exercise originally. But I think there are some wins policy-wise as well. There are some things that were the best of each of the legacy cities making their way to other parts of the city. And so there's been a lot of benefit in it. The other thing is that every public representative is now meaningful. There was an argument to be made in the Metro days. I don't even know who that person is, and I don't know what he means to me. People didn't really understand the split of services. They now know that their local politician is very meaningful to their everyday lives, and so the challenge of engaging them is a little bit easier today.
So why do, you know, maybe it's who I talk to and who I listen to, but it seems inevitably at some point in the course of a conversation, somebody will say, the current system stinks because the city is too big, and if we only could just put the toothpaste back in the tube and de-amalgamate, let the old city be the old city, let the inner suburbs be the inner suburbs, we wouldn't have these problems anymore.
Well, I think that's our challenge, though. There's a lot of growth happening in the city and more in the suburbs than there ever was before. If we can do that while protecting also the heritage of that legacy city. I don't call them former cities, they're legacies. And if we can maintain that legacy while that growth is going on, that's a challenge that's going on in cities all over the world. And I think that's what people are talking to. I don't want to lose my identity as I become a part of the City of Toronto. And that's actually one of our jobs, to help them continue to have a neighborhood identity.
Right, and I think that there's no question Toronto is growing, and that's presenting challenges. But I think it's also important to recognize the reason we're growing at the rate that we are is because we are the largest city in Canada, because we have a diverse population, because Toronto has become home to many people. And people who come to Toronto and choose it, I don't think they're choosing North York, Scarborough, or Etobicoke. They're choosing the City of Toronto. And when we think about the fastest growing city, I think now we're 4th in North America.
Yeah.
We're hosting the Pan Am Games. We've got so many attributes that big cities can brag about. We've got an arts community, medical community. We've got the universities that are now connected by mass transit. Like, there's so many things we have going for us by virtue of the fact that we're such a big city.
Okay.
But we just have to consider ourselves that big city.
But can I tell you, and this may be, again, through the haze of nostalgia here, I was a City Hall reporter 30 years ago when Art Eggleton was the mayor.
Yeah.
And they used to call Toronto back then the city that works.
Yeah.
And I don't hear people saying that as much anymore. Does the city still work given how big and clunky it is?
Yeah, I mean, every day 1.7 million people use a TTC. There's pressures on our system, no question. But, with the budget that we have, we provide a lot of services, from water to roads to sewers to snow clearing to snow plowing to leaf collection to parks and recs and camps and, the zoo. Like, there's a question, are we doing too much? And I think that's a legitimate question. And are we doing the core things that we should be doing as well as we could be doing? I think those are legitimate questions that the public has of us. But in terms of a city that works, I absolutely think that we work.
We still the city that works?
There is no question that our current mayor has tapped into that insecurity about maybe this city doesn't work anymore. It isn't the way it used to be. I feel that every time I'm talking to constituents, because I represented North York. We call it the city that really did work, but it didn't have some of the challenges it has as an amalgamated city. But I think part of this is a global phenomenon, tapping into just intensification worldwide, going into population centers and saying it's hard to live in a big city, only I can save you from that, is absolutely a ticket in the political world nowadays. You don't want to go too far. If you're going to have vision for that city going forward, it can't be all about what doesn't work in a city. It has to be, to some extent, about where we're going. And I think that's a conversation that is about to unfold in the City of Toronto.
But again, I keep hearing this, the values of the people who live in what you'd call the old City of Toronto, the legacy City of Toronto, and the values of the people who live in the inner suburbs, Etobicoke, North York, Scarborough, East York, York, as they then were called, are different. And it's too hard to shoehorn everybody into one shoe nowadays.
Yeah,
that's what you hear.
And I mean, I think I don't entirely subscribe to that. I mean, when we look at Mel Lastman and we look at David Miller, they went into their second terms with 70% approval ratings. And they had a wide success electorally across the suburbs as well as the inner core. Now, there's lots of things that happened that had Rob Ford get elected. And there was a higher proportion of his support for sure in the suburbs. But I don't think that reflects a core schism of values. I think he was just speaking to the sentiment of what people were feeling at the time, that City Hall had to get its spending under control.
Do you think that schism exists?
There's a difference between values, really, and your on-the-ground day-to-day lifestyle. And those are very different. My constituents and I, we live north of the 401. So if you want to talk to us in the evening, it's going to be a while, because it's going to take us a while to get home. And we're going to have a journey that you're not going to have if you're a short streetcar ride away from where you work. And so there are very different lifestyles. The challenge is tapping into that core value that exists for all of us. All of us wants this to be a very strong city. None of us wants to grow up in this city knowing that really to have good jobs, we're looking at getting on an airplane to go visit our kids and grandkids in Brazil or Mumbai. We have to build that here. And that's a value that I think every Torontonian shares, but we have to stop once in a while and acknowledge the lifestyle. I've been in forums in City Hall at Queen and Bay, where people say, well, you know, if people in Scarborough are so angry, why aren't they here? Where are the people of North York? They're still driving home. You've gone home, put food in front of your kids, and got back to this City Hall by 6:30 or 7 o'clock. My guys are still getting home. That's why we're looking at a transportation plan for the suburbs, because the on-the-ground, day-to-day lifestyles are so different that getting to the common ground between Torontonians is very hard to do.
But you've seen that up close and personal. You're in your capacity as heading up the Toronto Transit Commission.
Yeah.
The needs and the desires of people who live in Scarborough and Etobicoke, for example, are really different from those who live downtown.
And I want to give a shout out to Laurie Goldstein, actually, because he is the first Conservative to acknowledge that the best transit plan was the one that Council passed.
He did.
And so, you know, and again, building and linking our suburbs to transit and the appropriate form of transit is the best way that we can bring our city together. And it's true that when people spend too much time commuting and they get frustrated, stuck in traffic, they're not able to do other things. It has an impact on their quality of life and the perception of their city working. So our ability to bring transit into those neighborhoods, I think, is a key component of bringing our city together.
But I think that's only half of it, because
it's not all of it. It's a part of it.
Well, what I mean by that is, when that whole debate was taking place, what you would hear was, oh, the people in the inner city, they get a subway because they're the, you know, white wine sipping elites, and you folks who live in Scarborough, you know, a streetcar is good enough for you, you're not entitled to a subway. I mean, that kind of class warfare was played out on a daily basis when the city debated that, right?
Well, you know, and I think I think that was the narrative that was told by Rob Ford, and so, you know, the counter narrative is that, you know, the subways don't make sense. It's not a good way to spend scarce resources. That we have to build the appropriate transit to the appropriate parts of the city, and the downtown urban form is quite different than what's in Scarborough. I mean, but that's not the play that Rob Ford was making, and I think that's why we have the politics of division that we see, is because Rob Ford tends to take a very divisive approach to issues. And I think that is, that's not a suburban urban issue. That's a politics of governing by Rob Ford.
But the theory is, if there weren't something there if there weren't a cleavage already there to exacerbate, he wouldn't have tried to exacerbate it.
Sure, but when you think that 30% of the city can be convinced to the Rob Ford rhetoric, then you say, well, what is that really about? And I think it's wrapped up in lots of things. They like his anti-tax message, his small government message, his anti-transit message, his pro-car message. So there's lots of messages that resonate with people who, again, are not well served by transit, who our feeling is that they're paying more because they tend to be in the outer areas of the city that are economically disadvantaged. So the messages that he's bringing are consistent with the groups that can relate to some of those messages.
To the extent that those cleavages already existed, do you think they're much worse now that Mayor Ford has been the mayor for the last almost 3 years?
Well, I think if that flame existed, and certainly it did in Scarborough and Etobicoke, and to a greater extent, to some extent in North York, he fanned it. And he's very good at it. But it's a flame that politicians have been fanning for a long time in some of those areas.
So it's not that new.
The reason you see it not happening quite as much in North York is, I think Mayor Lassman began to see, even before he became the mayor of the new city of Toronto, began to see that really for longevity, where you want to go, you either wrap people up in this cloak of negativity, or you start to have a bold vision. And so we see it on Yonge Street, and for better or for worse, he had a vision to have a downtown in North York. In Scarborough and Etobicoke, you saw a lot of politicians wanting to engage, and if by some miracle you got some people into a gymnasium to talk, they were generally the ones who didn't have to commute. They were the ones who live and work close by in their neighborhood. And so they really only wanted to talk about their neighborhood. Money that was being spent, it's over here being spent somewhere else. I know that Metro's going to do this thing called deep lake water cooling, but it won't even ever reach Scarborough. Why are they spending that money? So to grab those negative thoughts and get to the parking lot in one piece, you just agree. In fact, you end up shutting down vision where in fact there is one very much needed in that part of town.
I just want to understand, because were either of you at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities meeting which took place? Both of you were out there? Okay, in Vancouver.
It's very important work.
Well, I was going to say, you were I mean, two of many, many municipal politicians from across the country. And did you see in your work whether or not the phenomenon that is being experienced in Ontario's capital city is the same in every big city in the country? Isn't that case where you've got this inner city versus the inner suburbs conflict?
I think Mayor Ford has made it somewhat more intense here with his endless message track, but in fact, it very nearly took down the current mayor in Vancouver. There was a play by Susan Anton to try and just pull all the suburbs together and knock out their vision party. Above the Greenbelt, below the Greenbelt has been the way things go in Ottawa for many, many years. So it's always a struggle. And it's really about that big difference in on-the-ground lifestyles. The question is whether or not politicians want to take advantage of it and in fact manipulate people with it, or they really want to build a great city. And we're going through a period right now where people are really being told that they should feel that way and continue to feel that way, and that might actually better their lives. The problem is it doesn't better their lives. It actually makes them worse.
Last minute to Karen Stintz.
Right. I mean, you know, again, Toronto is unique. It's not like Montreal. It's not like Calgary. It's not like Vancouver. We have different issues facing our city. And there's no question we're still working through what it means to be a big city, and it's being felt differently in different parts of the city. But I do believe that, you know, with continued investment in transit, you know, again, a conservative fiscal agenda with, you know, a bit of a sense of where we want the city to go, I think we can unite Toronto again, because I don't think we're as divided as the current administration would like us to believe. I mean, with 30% of the people who vote for the mayor, 70% of the people think there's a different Toronto. And that's the majority. So I don't find it as divisive as the current political environment would lead us to believe.
And we thank you two for coming in today and sharing your views on it.
Thank you.
Karen Stintz and Shelley Carroll.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.